Welcome back to the Bites and Bites podcast. I am your host, Kristin and Gerry. Today we're talking about something that doesn't get enough attention in agriculture: mental health. Farming is stressful work, and the weight farmers carry often goes unseen. Add to that the growing pressure of technology and endless decisions, and the toll can be heavy. My guest today is Gerry Friesen, also known as the recovering farmer. Gerry has lived this story himself, and now he helps others through his work in farmer wellness and conflict resolution. His honesty and experience brings much needed perspective to this conversation. Let's jump right in.
Well, I'm absolutely thrilled, and I know I say this for every guest, but I really do mean it every time I say it. But before we go into introductions and all the fun things, we're going to jump right into one of my favorite aspects of the show, which is favorite food and favorite food memory. Gerry, they do not need to be the same thing. What are they?
It's interesting you should ask that, because I'm going to just jump right in and say, well, I'm a Mennonite. And so there's certain Mennonite cuisines that I still love. And my favorite one is egg noodles, which we call tiltje in German, of course, with schmonfat, which is a cream gravy. And in the summertime, when our Saskatoon berries are fresh, I like to throw a pile of those on there. And that is my absolute favorite dish. My gallstones didn't appreciate those at all, but hey, I loved it.
That's amazing. And do you have a favorite food memory? Is it connected to that?
You know what? I go down this road and my mother used to make these Saskatoon vraneke or pierogies. And my cousin and I had a contest one day to see who could eat more. And I keep thinking back to that. But yeah, that was gluttonous to say the least.
Yes. Any particular type of, what were they? The potato and like onion
They were the Saskatoon berries, just the fruit.
Just the berries.
Yes.
Goodness, that's really tough on the stomach then if you had too many. What a memory. But thank you. That's great. And you're the first to mention anything to do with that type of cuisine. So that's amazing. Gerry, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the listeners?
All right. Well, I'm Gerry Friesen, as you know by now, and I call myself the recovering farmer. I used to farm in southwestern Manitoba. I grew up on a grain and poultry farm, and then my brother and I took over and we built a hog operation next to the turkey operation. And we farmed that till, I guess when I don't want people to know this, I say that we quit farming because other interests were taking over. But the reality of it is that the financial challenges were just too great, and we decided to exit while we could.
Which is a common plight of the farmer, the modern farmer these days, for sure, which we'll get into.
Yeah, and part of that, Kristin, of course, is while I was farming, I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression, and I did some volunteer work for a crisis line in Manitoba, and through that process started talking about my own journey, which I found to be very beneficial. And ultimately, I ended up writing a book, and here we are.
With the same title, The Recovering Farmer, right? Yes, it's definitely worth a read. I've been reading it, and you capture the human moments of what's going on, and I appreciated that. And I think this is something that we don't talk enough about, especially in the technology side. We're getting better, but we're not there yet. And even on the farming and agricultural side is the mental toll it takes to do the job.
Yeah.
And all the different things that go along with that.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm so happy to see that the conversations around that are growing. People are becoming more aware of it. There's still, of course, a stigma, but as these conversations carry on, of course, that stigma reduces, which is great to see.
Yeah, because there's really, to me, there's no shame in the conversation, right? I think that the more we can talk about things that impact our daily lives, the better we'll be as human beings and as a society. I don't think that we need to get weird about it. I don't see any problems with it. I suffer from PTSD and trauma in my own life. And I've noticed that people get really strange about when I mention why and what's happened to me in my life. But to me, it's part of me. Like it's part of who I am. To deny that aspect is weird to me. Like not acknowledging I have a right foot, like it's kind of one of those things.
Oh, I love that analogy. And I'm somewhat significantly older than you, and I grew up in a culture where if you were having these issues meant you weren't working hard enough, you weren't praying enough, your faith wasn't strong enough, and shame on you for feeling that way. And so it's awesome to see. And my kids, for example, that next generation are much more open to talking about it, which is really heartwarming.
Yeah, and for sure. So what got you to, first of all, write this book? And I realize this is kind of an origin story here for a moment, but Why did you decide to call it what you called it, the title too? So twofold question.
Okay,
Write the book and the title.
The Recovering Farmer piece, Kristin, after I quit farming, I started calling myself the Recovering Farmer. I still have no idea why. I think it was perhaps, in line with we hear about recovering alcoholics, right? And so I called myself the Recovering Farmer. And then one day I was on a radio show and the host interviewed me as such. And as soon as the show was over, my sister called me and she says, what does this mean? What does it mean to be a recovering farmer? And I didn't have a clear answer for her. And so I actually looked into it a wee bit. And to recover means to return to a previous level of health, prosperity, and equanimity. And that just kind of fit right there. And so, of course, there's a story there as well that, returning to a previous level of wealth. Well, I keep telling people I blew my retirement and then now my wife tells me I have to work till noon the day of my funeral. But you know what? I'm okay with that. I'm wealthy in many other ways with my kids, my grandkids, where I live, what I can do, the ability to do what I do. So there's that. The health piece, of course. You know what? My mental health is an ongoing journey. And will be till my life is over. And so that's a continuing challenge I face and deal with. But the real big piece is the equanimity piece. Equanimity meaning to have a level of calmness even under stress. And I don't do well there at all. And it comes out, and my wife often questions this, it comes out particularly when I'm driving and I get frustrated with other drivers. So clearly that recovering piece is an ongoing part of my journey. So somewhere along the line, shortly after I started talking publicly about my journey, I was also challenged at the time I should write a blog. And so I thought, okay, I do that. And I found out very quickly my brain, my train of thought, if in fact doesn't leave the station without me, is good for about 600 words. And then I need to move on to something else. So how the book came about, Kristin, I'm not entirely sure. I had sometimes thought I would compile those blog posts into a book. But when I go back, really, a lot of them didn't do me any good, and I'm sure wouldn't do any reader any good. So I started afresh. It's part memoir. It's part telling stories about the farming piece and about other areas of my life. And part of it is also somewhat of a self-help book, just some points that have worked well for me. And I didn't write this to push my ideas down anybody else's throats. Not that I think that I have the answers, but rather this is me and this is how I deal with the issues that I have to deal with.
I think that that's brilliant. And it reads like that too. So hopefully the listeners will also pick it up. It's not a very long read. It won't take you too long.
No,
it's not like 1,000 pages. It's not that bad. Everybody relax. I think a lot of people listening are technical manual readers. So they're like, oh, no.
No, and it doesn't have any big words in it.
I was really struck right from the jump of reading it too, that you were talking about sitting at the kitchen table with people who were struggling financially. And you said, I've been there. I know this. And the relatability and the connectedness that you already established within the first few pages of the book they touched me right away. And I was like, see, I want to read things about people's experiences, not some fabricated experience. Don't get me wrong. Love my fantasy books, but that's not escapism. That's different. But this was relatable because I've heard these stories too. And even though I'm not a farmer, and even though I sit in the support world of agriculture, I hear these stories. I just got off a call hearing some really crazy things a little bit ago. And it took me a minute to sit down and digest it for a second, because there's an ag tech company and I don't know who they are and I don't care, that created a robot that would stir grain in the silo. That's great. Why do you need that? They needed it to keep the farmer out of the silo. Why would the farmer go in the silo? Not for a good reason. And I thought to myself, why are we creating more problems and not dealing with the actual problem when this story was being told to me? And it got me thinking a lot about the work that you do, Gerry, because that's real. That's real. That's where I'm actually kind of I'm speechless almost. And people who know me know that says a lot when I go speechless. But to think about how we use tech to solve a problem that we really should be sitting the farmer down and having a different type of conversation rather than just chucking technology at it is just absurd. And the fact that they've missed the reason entirely. That's the thing I'm struggling with in terms of the technology side of the house, is because we're not actually talking to the grassroots farmer. Right. We're not having those deep conversations that we need to have. And this is why I think that working inside of agriculture requires a different type of skill set, empathy, relatability, finding ways to connect, because food is ultimately love, right? And you have to understand how to work in that world. And I'm not picking on anybody who works in critical infrastructure and that you need to be, getting the guitar out and sing Kumbaya around a fire. It's not that serious, but we also need to have a different understanding of how our food gets to our plate and the toll it takes on the people who do that. Because we live in a modern world where we're disassociated from our food supply. We take it for granted, the privilege of taking it for granted. But we forgot about all those generations that have allowed us to do that. And that's the mental health piece as well, because it's almost like the farming community is forgotten.
Yeah. And you know what? I had the privilege of, I suppose, back while I was still farming. The Minister of Agriculture in our province here appointed me to the Manitoba Farm Debt Mediation Board. Mm-hmm. And so I've dealt with hundreds of farm families. And so that connection you talk about, that being able to relate, I've sometimes questioned, why did I have to, in my book, I say I went broke, dealt with mental health and addiction issues so I could do today what I'm doing. And I sometimes go, well, yeah, cool. Did I really have to go through all of that? And yet those connections are incredibly important. And mm-hmm. So when you have a farm family who's struggling, just like you talked about, being able to sit with someone across a kitchen table who's had similar experiences, it opens people up. It opens people up when they feel that empathy, they feel that they come to this understanding they're not alone. Mm-hmm. And so they're able to deal with their issues. But the other piece to that is, which I've found, and I've also found out now that other occupations are like this somewhat too, is I talk in my book about the identity that farmers have. Mm-hmm. That connection to the soil, that connection to the animals they're raising, and how when that identity is threatened, there's a lot at stake. And it's interesting, I had an email, school teacher bought my book and read it and reached out, and he's retired now. And he said, you know what? School teachers go through that same identity crisis when they retire. And I suspect it goes for any other people. My wife just retired from being a medical office assistant, or yes, that's what it is. And there's that same thing. Like, she gets up the following morning and it's like, who am I and what do I do? And so, of course, that identity is very important to ourselves, to our self-esteem, and to our confidence.
I completely hear this, and I watched my father go through that when he retired from the fire department after 45 years, even longer if you consider the Explorer post before, and knowing that he was going to have to discover who he was outside of his uniform. And I think that a lot of those professions deal with that. My dad's doing fine, by the way, if anybody wanted to know. He's got himself a little job and he's got a little community around him, so he's good. Perfect. And I think that's the trick, Gerry, and I think that we're kind of dancing around it, but it's community that ultimately is the important bit.
I love that word. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting is that it took unfortunately some bad times for you to get to where you are now. But the fact that you turn that around and you're sharing with others, whether it's the book or any of the avocation you do now, and you're trying to make sure someone else doesn't go through this, or at least doesn't have to go through the extremes. And I think that that's really beautiful. So I applaud you for that, because to me, that's part of the human experience that we should be sharing, and we should be creating, again, community. And I say that knowing that I've seen people at their worst, especially when it comes to cyber attacks and the aftermath, the shame, the devastation, tears, and I think someone recently was explaining to me what it was like to lose an animal that they were raising. And I know that this is different. It's not just like losing a household pet, that's different. But the fact that farmers understand that if livestock gets sick, that's understandable that they would pass. If there was a complication with the environment around them, that's understandable. If another animal got them, that's understandable. But to have something like a cyber attack hit the farm and that caused loss of life, there's no, how did you get your head wrapped around that? And I think people don't understand that, because they think that people, like you said, just raise animals for slaughter and that's it. That's no big deal. And they just are callous and they get through it. No, they generally care about their animals very deeply, very deeply. The region that they live in and they raise those animals also is part of their identity as well. If you had to remove someone, not only from their occupation, but where they lived, that would be extremely difficult. Like you said, sometimes it's easier to sell the farm than it is to continue the farm. And this displaces people, again, from the identity and maybe potentially where they lived. And now they have to go live somewhere else. They're not, instead of living in the prairie, they're mountain people now. And that's kind of another trigger for identity, which I think you did discuss a little bit in the book as well, of just the displacement in general of lifestyle.
Yeah.
listening to the Bites and Bites podcast. If you're enjoying this episode, please like it, share it, and pass it along to someone who might need to hear it. You can also check out some of my writing on Substack. And don't forget to sign up for updates on my upcoming book. You'll find the links right in the show notes. Most importantly, thank you for staying with us through this important conversation about our food system and the people who grow the food that we depend on. Now back to the conversation.
And you used one word there, Kristin, which is, I think a lot of people feel when they go through that challenge, and that's the word shame. And so when this happens and we feel that shame, we shrink back and we don't deal with it effectively. And again, me talking about it kind of almost happened by accident. I keep saying I was manipulated into it, which is fine, so be it. But what struck me was a few things. Number one is how people, when they heard my story, they would come forward, they would come out of their own closet or hiding, as it were, to talk to me and to share their own stories, and we would share stories. And I maintain that we learn the most by talking to each other.
I think the interesting thing about the crossover here in this particular regard is I always say that cybersecurity is about dealing with social engineering, so manipulation of people's feelings around other humans, that they'll always do the right thing, and the fact that we have to mitigate shame. Because when people are in shame, they tend to act up a little bit more, and they might do the opposite of what they intend just to cover over the icky feeling, because shame is literally the worst. And I think people who have been through counseling and therapy and other things have the tools to deal with mitigating shame a little. And like I said, cybersecurity is about mitigating shame and social engineering. If you never received those tools and you're trying to help someone through a crisis, you may not do it as well as you should, meaning you might not be as empathetic, or you might be a little more callous than you need to be, or a little bit more difficult, I guess is what I'll say. And I think that the agricultural side of the house, in terms of a critical infrastructure, needs a caring hand and leadership that's more catering to the community rather than fighting the community. Yeah. We don't need more solutions that aren't tied to the problem. We need people that are actually going to deal with the problems that are out there.
And that understanding. And again, I'm part of what's called the Manitoba Farmer Wellness Program, which offers support to our to our farmers, their families, and farm employees.
Great. And
one of the things that was key when we retain the counselors, therapists that we use, is that they would have an understanding of agriculture, because the stressors that farmers face are somewhat unique. And so I find it interesting that at one point in my life where I didn't want to go back on medication, I thought, well, talk therapy would work for me. And I went to see a psychologist, and it was towards the end of our farming career, and finances weren't good, and I just wanted out. And he got stuck on how I could justify selling the family farm. Well, trust me, at that point, that wasn't at all an issue for me anymore. For me, it was, if I want to save myself, I need to move on. And that was fine. But at the end of that appointment, instead of going, yeah, okay, I can help you, he says, you know what, you can't afford me, you better go back on medication. Well, to have that kind of response from someone who's supposed to help you was everything but helpful.
Oh, I'm so sorry that happened. And I think that's ridiculous, because I don't think that medication's the be all end all. I still think you need to have talk therapy and communication and share, because you can't just internalize everything. That's not the human experience, where we can talk, we can emote, we're supposed to share. That's what we do. And also, how isolating for that conversation. And as a farmer, isolation is kind of, part of the game. So he isolated you even more. That's ridiculous.
Well, I left that appointment just thinking, well, I'm a hopeless case. There is no hope for me. There's nothing I can do. And so again, but that happens. And I've had countless counselors and therapists and family doctors and what have you over the years. And that's why I always challenge people. If the first appointment doesn't work, don't give up. Please, whatever you do, go get a second, third, or even fourth opinion. And it's no different than our physical health, Kristin. And you drew that comparison before, and I so much appreciate that, because when there's something wrong with me physically, I go see a doctor. And if I don't get satisfaction from that first appointment, guess what? I'm going to go back and talk to that doctor again, or I'm going to go see somebody else. But I need answers, because I hurt or something doesn't feel right and I need to get it fixed.
That's right. And I think if we looked at mental health that way, maybe that we would all do a little bit better. For sure. I always tell people, because there's a lot of stigma around going to therapy. And I always tell people, don't think about it as I'm having to go to therapy. I've failed. I thus need therapy. You know, really, you're going to therapy to get tools to be able to manage your life. It's like using AI. I know that's the worst comparison, really, but it's just a tool. It's like picking up a shovel or a hammer. You're learning how to use the tool. That's what therapy is. And I think if more people realize that, they'd probably be less judgmental of it and maybe more open to it. And yeah, it is weird talking to another human being about everything about that's going on in your brain. That is a little strange because it's your thought process and you're trying to articulate what it means to someone else to interpret. That is a little strange, but it feels good. It always feels good.
And guess what? Sorry, Kristin, you've got me going down this road now. Guess what happens when we verbalize what's going on up here and I've done this countless times, and I start spewing out all these thoughts I have. And all of a sudden I realize, well, at least half of what I was thinking was a bunch of crap. It wasn't real. It was perceived. And so when you verbalize it, you get rid of a lot of that stuff and suddenly you feel lighter. And then you can actually talk about those things that are important to talk about.
Yeah, it's always interesting because when people are in the middle of a fight and, you know, you're yelling and back and forth, that's just the energy, the frustration coming out. You have to wait to get to the heart of the matter, whether that's 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever. And once you get to the heart of the matter, that's when the healing and the conversation can start. And therapy is the same way. Sometimes you just have blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden, boom, you're there and you have this realization of, oh, I'm not crazy. I actually have a real reason to feel this way. Let's deal with it. And I love what you said before, Gerry, that it's a life journey for you. Yep. This is not one and done. You can't just go to therapy and be like, I'm healed. I mean, if you can do that, great. Like, I'm happy for you. But I think it's a life journey. And for me, just chuck it up to the excitement of being alive. You know, it's just part of my journey. This is just what it is. And I think if more people embraced it with a positive attitude and could move through it, I think that would be great. Swinging it back to the agricultural side, though, farmers don't have a lot of time to go to therapy. And there's a lot of things that are questionable in their isolation. What have you find when you're in counseling and have been counseling others to get them to start managing it in the moment, in the field, if you will, in the tractor by themselves, or if they're in the moment where they're questioning if they want to be alive any longer, what are the steps that you give them, like the top 5, maybe?
Well, and again, Kristin, everybody's different. And so some things work for some people don't. You know what? When I started out with going to therapists, for example, or really even before that, when I was working with this agricultural crisis line, is that my colleagues there would talk about mindfulness, you know, or sitting and doing a body inventory and yoga and what have you.
Grounding. Yep.
Yeah, none of that worked for me, Kristin. I didn't have the patience. And so I would sit down and go, okay, and then boom, all of these horrible thoughts or stinking thinking, I call it, would start coming out again, right? And so through the years, I've learned that number one, I think this is fairly universal, is I used to spend a lot of time on the road and often I'd drive for hours on end and all of a sudden realize my radio wasn't even on. I wasn't listening to music. So as soon as I switched on some music and was listening to music, that had a calming effect and got me back into the present. I know for myself now, exercise is important for a few different reasons. Number one, physically, of course. Number two, mentally. Mm-hmm. I've learned that there's certain things, particularly in the wintertime, that I need to do when the days are shorter, the weather is cold, you don't go outside as much. In the summertime, I'm an avid golfer. And of course, talking to a farming community, tell them that I go golfing almost every day doesn't work. But there are things that we can do. But then first and foremost, again, is make sure you talk to people. Yes, we spend hours on end alone in a tractor, in a combine, in a barn, whatever the case may be. And so that human connection is so incredibly important. And in fact, we have a chemical in our brain called oxytocin, which gets released when we chat with people, shake someone's hand, just make eye contact. And here's a personal story again, which is in the book. 20 years ago, I actually watched my brother go ass over tea kettle on his motorbike, and which wasn't that pleasant. But then second to that was that while he was laying in a coma in the hospital, I had more work fall on me because I was farming together with him.
Yeah.
And so a couple of days after that happened, I showed up at the hog barn and my neighbor showed up. And I suspect he could probably tell I wasn't in a good place. And so he said, "How are you doing?" And you know how we normally respond, doesn't matter how we're doing. We say, "I'm fine, another day in paradise," whatever the case may be.
Yes.
But for some reason that morning, I started doing exactly what we just talked about, verbalizing everything that was going on up here. And you know, the neighbor sat there for an hour. He listened to me. He didn't provide answers, and I knew he wouldn't. He normalized and validated what I was feeling, but I was able to unload enough that I had the encouragement to step out and seek further help. Unfortunately, that first step I took was to see that psychologist we just talked about. But hey, at least I was on the right path.
And you didn't give up either, Gerry. That's the important part. That's the really important part. And I think people don't understand just the mental load of what it means to farm. And what we meant by isolation is, like I said, there's a lot of alone time. You don't have community. There's a lot of jobs these days that require you to be alone. A lot of it is in an office, or you're around people, or you're visiting customers or clients, or, you know, there's community. You go to a coffee shop, there's things like that, but you're in the middle of a farm. There's nothing around. Yeah, you're seeing some beautiful sights like nature and the weather and all these great things, but it doesn't fill you with any type of joy that you really need as a human being, because we need connection with other humans. It's our wiring. It's our wiring.
And all that alone time just gives us more time to think, right? If I'm in a tractor putting in a crop in spring, I'm looking at all that money I'm investing in growing a crop. I have no idea what Mother Nature will do. I have no idea what government policy will do. I have no idea what kind of trade actions there's going to be. And I have no idea what I'm going to be getting for that product when I finally take it off the field in fall. And so it gives us far too much time to think.
Yeah. Or if you're going to have the equipment to get it off the field, or if you're going to have the right windows. Are you going to are you going to break even? Are you going to be short? Like, what's going to happen? There is so much stress in farming, and I have so much respect for it. And this is where it drives me mad that people don't even know what they're eating anymore, because they don't know what went into that meal, whatever it is. And it's hard for me to not be so grateful and thankful. And this is why I always tell people to thank a farmer. They're like, you know, is there anything we can do to help you out, Kristin? And I always say, go thank a farmer. I don't care if it's the person down the street, or you call somebody, or you just put it on your social media. Thank a farmer, because it doesn't matter what type of farmer you're there. I don't care. Just go thank them, because it's not easy. It's not easy at all. And I think, and we talked a little bit about this in our pre-meeting, but with all the introduction of technology now, has become even more of a mental load. Because the median age of a farmer is something around 63, I believe. I could be wrong about that number, but I think I'm pretty close. And to put them into or force them, or have no choice because you can't buy anything else now, a tech GPS tractor that, sure, concept-wise, it's pretty cool, right? It will line you up. It will drive for you. Great. But to have someone who's not a tech savvy individual all of a sudden in a truck with all these blinking lights and alarms going off, and they can't shut it off, or they can't slow down, or all these other things, is even more stressful than just using the original tractor or not having these things. And I'm worried about the resilience of farming moving forward, especially since we need more first gen farmers. And sure, some of them will be really tech savvy and happy to do it, which is great. But we still need to understand how to farm, because there's a lot of tribal knowledge, a lot of legacy knowledge. So I know, Gerry, this is a bit like kind of the side here, but do you think that the addition of all this technology, whether it's ag tech or whatever new tractors, things that come in, do you think it's adding to the mental load that's already there, since we're not totally dealing with the original problem itself?
I suspect, and you talked about the median age of farmers, and I think you're pretty close to what you said. And so I'm somewhat older than the median age, but I can tell you that I have a simple laptop. I've had to, in the last year, add 2 more laptops to my office because of the work I do. So I have 3 laptops. Just the fact that I have to turn around and fire up another one stresses me out. And then when something doesn't work right, it drives me nuts. And so thankfully, I have a son who's an IT geek. And so a quick phone call. Well, he gets exasperated with me because he said, well, Dad, what's your password? And I said, Funny thing, I don't remember. Well, and then I get a tongue on why I should. And then he finally sorts it out for me and explains how to do it. Well, a day or two later, I have to do the same thing again. And can I remember? No. And so I hear these stories, and normally they're kind of funny at the time, because I'll hear these stories about farmers my age getting into their tractor, and like you say, the beeping starts and they get all rattled and frustrated, and they're calling on the radio for someone to come help them. And so does that add to it? Absolutely it does. I suspect the younger generation probably embrace this technology a lot more, but even for them, because there's so much more to think about. I can't help, Kristin, but compare farming today to what it was like when I was growing up on a grain farm, for example.
Of course.
You know what? There was one variety of wheat and there was one variety of barley. And so we had a 10-foot press drill, and my dad would throw the crop in the ground, and there would be one herbicide he would use, and we would actually stir it with our arm and not even use a mask, which of course you shouldn't do. And then you would take the crop off and you would deliver it to the elevator, and boom, you're done for the year. But now all of these decisions have to be made, and there's more and more and more and more. And when you add technology to the mix, there's even more decisions to be made. And that becomes overwhelming. And I have a saying I sometimes use that says you're only one decision away from a completely different life. And when I look back, a lot of where I ended up with on my farm was because of decisions I made. And of course, this is where I go into a spiel about the fact that all these stressors are occurring. And Farm Management Canada here in Ottawa, I actually did a study a few years ago that talked about how stress impacts our decision making. And so that farmers that are rational and are able to make clear decisions are more likely to be profitable. So it's just an indication again about how absolutely everything is linked.
Yeah, that completely makes sense to me. It's so, and I never thought about it, Gerry. You kind of made me think about it for a minute, that we do have so many varieties of crops now in choice, and how they take to different climates and different soil and different moisture levels and pests and birds and all these other things, that it's not simple anymore. There's too much choice, and some people love lots of choice. That's great. But generally speaking, it's something that is something like farming. You don't want to have 15 choices for one thing. That's a lot.
You know what? I use the example of a cell phone, Kristin. When I first bought my first cell phone back in the mid-90s, it was this big contraption you threw on the dashboard of your vehicle. You had one cell phone provider in Manitoba, so you had no choices there. You had basically one phone you could use, and you would drive, and there'd be areas that still didn't have coverage.
Right.
And you could just swear at someone because there wasn't coverage, right? And then more choices came along, and then the choice I made wouldn't have reception in a certain area, and then I'd be mad that I hadn't made, so I'd be blaming myself, right? Till that point, I could blame the world. But at that point, suddenly these things my decisions had implications on what I could and couldn't do. And then we start beating ourselves up. We're our own worst critics, and that just drives us towards the abyss.
It does. This is where resilience is so important with farming, right? You have to be able to overcome, as you said, the dark thinking, whatever. I don't know what you called it. What did you call it?
Thinking.
Yes. You have to be able to overcome that. And again, the reason why you do your job is you're trying to feed the world, right? If you will. I know that seems a little extreme, but you're trying to feed the world and provide, nutrient-based food that's good for humans, or anywhere if you're feeding animals, that too. And you're doing a good thing. It's a good job. Like, it's a good feeling. You're doing something for the benefit of humanity. But then you're being pushed down so hard for what you do, it's counterproductive. So resilience is hard because you're not appreciated, and then you beat yourself up. And this is very similar to some of the failings in cybersecurity. And I'm not comparing farming to cybersecurity per se, but it's adjacent. That you deal with a lot of crises over and over again, and burnout is real. Yeah. And we all struggle with mental health, and it's still not a topic that's brought up enough in our industry, for sure. And this is why I know I make people uncomfortable when I talk about it. And even now, maybe people are cringing listening. I have no idea. But I think it's an important thing to talk about because it's part of your human experience. Yeah. And especially in agriculture, which is fueling us humans, and we need to eat. And then, of course, we have all kinds of issues around eating, whether it's food security or any type of food disorders or eating disorders or things like that. We've got all these aspects. It's still around it in a different way. That why don't we just fundamentally deal with the basics of the people who grow the crops or raise the livestock need support, And we don't want to add more burdens to them, create tech that they don't need, or create tech that causes them more headaches in general. And then on top of it, now you have a cyber issue because it's connected to the internet and you didn't know it was connected to the internet because you just bought this tractor. Yeah, sure, it's GPS internet connected, but why is that your problem? And like, there's all these factors into it. And then your family gets hacked and their bank account information's gone. And there's all this additional stress, which doesn't need to be there. And it's so infuriating to me that we have created these systems that just hurt instead of help. And this is why, the podcast was born. This is why you wrote your book. This is why you continue to advocate the way you do. Same with me. We just want people to be better and be okay. Be okay is probably the best way to say it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I just want people to be okay.
For sure. And that's why I say there is hope and there is relief. And that's what I want everybody to know. And that's what I want everybody to pursue.
Yeah, exactly. And also not to be afraid, not to be afraid to pursue it, because it is for the betterment of yourself and your family and your profession. And we need more farmers in general to come forward and say, I'm not okay, but it's okay to not be okay. And then let's deal with it.
Okay.
And I say that all the time.
Yeah.
It's okay to feel the feels, it's not a problem.
Yeah.
It's all in what you do with those feelings that matters.
And it's okay to reach out for help.
Exactly. And I think, again, as the podcast has evolved, I really want to continue to have these topics that are getting to know and understand the agricultural sector, getting to know where your food comes from. How do we secure and protect if we don't understand it? We'll just create a little robot that stirs the silo that nobody needs. Those kind of things. And I really applaud you, Gerry, for writing this book and being authentically you and putting yourself out there that way and constantly pushing to make sure people are okay, especially the agricultural community. So thank you very much for that. I really appreciate that.
I've been asked, how can you have that freedom to talk about it? And I've said to people, my answer is very clear, that I've found that by talking about it, I've gained more freedom. And that's important to know, because I'm not holding all this stuff in now and shying away from seeing people, shying away from talking. Rather, I'm talking about it openly, and it's made me freer. And so that's a message for your listeners out there, is talking about it helps.
It does. And it's interesting, because I was thinking while you were saying that about the person who probably said that to you, you were making them uncomfortable with your freedom because they want that freedom too, and I think that I always try to remind myself of that, like how you speak out and how people receive it. How they receive it is really not your problem, but ultimately you're trying to make sure they understand, and people have their own bag of things they're dealing with as well. This conversation just really resonates all around, that it's okay not to be okay. And if you need help, reach out. Community is super important. Remember to thank a farmer, for heaven's sakes. Those kind of things need to happen. Just be a kind human being and don't add to the problem. So don't make robots that stir silos and do things that are not dealing with the actual problem, which is the mental health of the people who grow and sustain us. And thanks so much for being here, Gerry. I loved this conversation. I loved all our conversations, but I loved this one too.
Yeah, well, I enjoy it. As you can tell, Kristin, I can get quite passionate about it. So thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely.
A huge thank you to Gerry for joining me today. This was such an uplifting conversation despite the heavy topic. Gerry's honesty reminds us that it's okay not to be okay, and the resilience comes from community and connection. If you are in any distress, please do reach out. Call a friend, talk to a neighbor. You're not alone. You'll find all of Gerry's links in the show notes, and I encourage you to read his book, The Recovering Farmer. And as always, remember to like, comment, and share this episode with a friend. It makes a big difference, and I'm so glad to have you part of the Bites and Bites crew. Stay safe, stay curious, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.